Looking back on my life now, it's hard to believe that it could all have been destroyed so easily, so quickly, and so irrevocably. But back then, a few years ago, I considered myself a man who had achieved everything. Money, career, love. I was born into an ordinary family in Manchester. My childhood was neither poor nor rich. My father was an engineer, my mother a school teacher. I wasn't a child prodigy, but I always knew what I wanted. To get to the top. I wanted to live in a world where I had freedom to choose, freedom to decide, freedom to be independent. After university, I started working in finance, first as an assistant, then as an analyst. I lived on coffee, sleepless nights, and ambition. 10 years later, I already had my own investment company. It was growing rapidly. I found myself in the right place at the right time. The crisis broke many, but for me, it became an opportunity. And so, at 35, I was living in a London penthouse, driving a Maserati, and could afford to dine in the most expensive restaurants. But my greatest treasure then wasn't the car or the apartment, but my wife, Claire. I met her at a charity gala. I remember her walking into the room in a silver dress, the chandeliers seeming to highlight her every movement. She wasn't a classic beauty, but there was something captivating about her. Her gaze, her smile, her confidence. We started talking, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like this wasn't just a girl, but a woman capable of surprising me. We started dating, cautiously at first, then rapidly. She had something I'd always lacked, a lightness. I could be tense, reserved, overly serious, but she could laugh, dance at 3 in the morning, and kiss as if it were the first and last kiss of my life. A year later, we got married. Our wedding was lavish, a country mansion, guests from all over the world, champagne flowing freely. I remember holding her hand at the altar and thinking, this is it. I've achieved it all. Life with Claire was like a movie. We traveled, Paris, New York, Bali. She loved photography, and our house was full of frames with her pictures, the sea, the mountains, the two of us. Sometimes I looked at these photos and couldn't believe they were my reality. We often hosted dinners for friends. She knew how to host. Her easy jokes, her charm, her ability to keep up a conversation. Every man noticed her, but I was proud of it. After all, she chose me. And at night, when the bedroom door closed, she became different. More passionate, demanding, frank. She could wake me with kisses at 3 in the morning and then laugh like a child, burying her face in my shoulder. I lived in the belief that we had everything. And if someone had told me back then that this woman would one day ruin my life, I would have laughed. Of course, there were difficulties. My work took up all my time. I left in the morning and returned late at night. Sometimes Claire would get offended. Alex, I miss you. I don't want a husband I only see on Sundays. I promised to improve. But work always came first. I thought it was the right thing to do. I was earning money for us. I thought she understood. And she smiled, nodded, kissed me on the cheek, and I believed everything was fine. One evening, we were sitting on the terrace. I was drinking whiskey. She was drinking white wine. London was ablaze with lights, and it felt like the whole world was at our feet. Are you happy? She asked suddenly. I was surprised. Of course. I have you, I have us. Isn't it obvious? She looked at me strangely, a little sadly. Sometimes I think happiness isn't what we have, but what we're afraid of losing. I laughed and hugged her. At the time, I didn't attach any significance to these words. But as it turned out later, they were precisely the meaning. Now, looking back, I realize there were cracks in our perfect life even then. I just didn't notice them, or didn't want to notice them. I was too sure I had everything under control. That love was a reward that could be secured with a ring on my finger and a joint bank account. But life works differently. It always finds a way to show you that no money and no power can save you from betrayal. And what began as a beautiful love story soon turned into a nightmare that robbed me of everything. We'd been together for 3 years when I first felt something strange. It wasn't facts, but rather sensations, a shadow that flickers on the wall when you turn your head. You know it's there, but you can't prove it. Claire usually shared her day with me. She could talk for hours about meetings, about her friends, about the new dress she'd bought. But at some point, she became more silent. How was your day? I'd ask in the evening, taking off my tie. She smiled, but her eyes were far away. Nothing special. And that was it. Before, that would be followed by a half-hour story. Now, just a few words. Another change, the phone. It used to be lying around everywhere on the kitchen table. in the bathroom, on the couch. But now it was always next to her, and most importantly, face down. At first, I didn't pay attention. Then I noticed that when her phone vibrated, she quickly picked it up and went into another room. I asked once, "Who's texting you like that?" She laughed, "Friends. You know, we're always chatting." But there was a note of irritation in her voice. She changed in bed, too. The passion hadn't disappeared, on the contrary. Sometimes it became too harsh, too greedy. It was as if she had a pent-up energy she didn't know what to do with. She would start playing at night, demanding more than before, and then in the morning act as if nothing had happened. It both turned me on and scared me. I felt a fire between us, but that fire wasn't just mine anymore. One day, I returned home earlier than usual. The apartment was quiet. Claire was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, talking on the phone. I heard her laugh, light, flirtatious. I knew that laugh well because it had once been directed at me. I entered the room and she quickly fell silent. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. "Nobody." She waved her hand dismissively. "Just an old acquaintance." And again the smile, but too forced. We started arguing. Before, our disagreements had been mild, ending in reconciliation. Now everything was different. "You're always at work," she screamed. "I'm alone all day." "I work for us," I replied. "For us, or for myself and my business." These words cut me. I tried to explain that I was doing everything for our family, but deep down, I knew there was some truth to her words. Soon, the trips to a friend's began. Claire would say she was staying overnight at Sophie or Rebecca's. She used to always invite me along, or at least send me photos. Now, nothing. I once offered to drive her. She hesitated. "No need. I'll do it myself." And she left without kissing me goodbye. I started getting nervous. I felt like I was going crazy. I sat in the office and caught myself thinking not about the deals, but about where Claire was. Who was she with? Once, I even asked the driver to pick her up. But then I changed my mind. It seemed humiliating. I'm a man. I trust my wife. I won't spy on her. Only at night, lying alone in my huge bed, did I feel the trust slipping away like sand through my fingers. And yet, when she returned, I couldn't help but succumb to her charms. She would sit on my lap, hug me, kiss me, and everything else would disappear. "Did you miss me?" she whispered, running her hand over my chest. I wanted to ask, "Where have you been?" But instead, I pulled her close and forgot everything. This mixture of passion and suspicion burned me from the inside. That evening, when I first seriously considered her infidelity, we were having dinner at home. I poured wine and cooked a steak. I wanted to do something nice. She arrived later than promised and sat at the table in a new dress. She smelled of a different perfume, not the one I'd given her. I looked at her and suddenly realized I didn't know this woman anymore. She was close, but it was like she was on the other side of the world. "Claire," I said carefully, "are we okay?" She looked at me longingly and smiled. "Of course, Alex. We're doing great." But her smile was such that my heart sank. Now, looking back, I realize that was when I should have stopped everything. Figure it out, have an honest conversation, maybe even leave. But love and pride prevented it. I loved her too much and believed too much that I had the situation under control. Meanwhile, she was already making a plan that cost me everything I had. With each passing day, the fog between us grew thicker. We lived under the same roof, slept in the same bed, but it was as if we existed in parallel worlds. And yet, it was precisely during this period that Claire unexpectedly became even closer to me, though this closer had something unsettling about it. In the evening, she would come up to me while I was working on my laptop and suddenly sit on my lap. Her fingers would slide down my neck, down my chest, and her breath would brush against my ear. "Alex," she would whisper, "you work too much." I would close the laptop, and we would move the conversation to the bedroom. There, Claire would become different, more uninhibited than before, demanding and greedy. It was as if she were trying to prove something not to me, but to herself. One day, she blindfolded me with her silk scarf. "Trust me," she whispered. I let her. Her hands and lips roamed my body, and I felt myself losing control. In that moment, I forgot all my doubts. I was sure of only one thing. she belonged to me. But when I removed the blindfold, she was already lying on her back, looking at the ceiling, and her smile was so distant that a chill ran down my spine. The next day, she was cold again. She spent the entire evening on her phone, and when I approached, she hid it. "Friends again?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. "And if they are friends?" She replied defiantly, "You're not interested in my conversations anyway." I wanted to object, but remained silent. We went to Paris for the weekend. I thought it would help. The city of love strolls along the Seine, dinners in small restaurants. Everything was wonderful that first evening. She laughed, took photos, hugged my hand. She put on a real show at the hotel. Candles, champagne, lace. I looked at her and thought, this is my woman. Everything else is just my stupid imagination. That night, her body was like fire. She kissed me as if she wanted to erase all doubts. I fell asleep with a feeling of happiness. But in the morning, I woke up alone. Her phone was lying on the nightstand and the screen lit up with an incoming message. I automatically checked it. "Did you miss me?" it said. My heart sank. I reached out, but at that moment, Claire came out of the bathroom and saw me holding the phone. "What are you doing?" Her voice was icy. "Who is this?" I asked. "You don't trust me." She snatched the phone from me and pressed it to her chest. "Alex, I'm your wife. And you're acting like a jealous teenager." I tried to say something, but she didn't let me. She came over, sat on my lap, and kissed me on the lips. "Forget it. We're in Paris." And again her body, her scent, her smile. And again I gave in. When I returned home, I couldn't shake my doubts. I began to notice every little detail. Her delays, her new dresses, her perfume, which she hadn't worn before. One night, she returned late, smelling of expensive wine. I sat in the living room and waited for her. "Where have you been?" I asked. "At Rebecca's. We were having dinner. At 1 in the morning." She grinned. "Alex, I'm a grown woman. I need a little freedom." "Freedom?" I repeated. "We're married, Claire." She looked at me intently. "Married doesn't mean caged." These words hit harder than I expected. More and more often, I noticed that her passion in bed had changed. It was as if she carried someone else's energy. Sometimes I felt like her thoughts were elsewhere. Her body was close, but her soul was far away. And yet, time and again, I succumbed to her touch. She knew how to make me forget everything. Her hands, her kisses, her whispers. But after intimacy, she would turn away and fall asleep quickly, as if erasing me from her thoughts. One day, we went to dinner with friends. Claire was dazzling. Her dress clung to her figure, her hair shone, laughter filled the room. The men looked at her, and I felt proud. But then I noticed her gaze linger on one of them, a tall man in an expensive suit. Their eyes met, and there was more than casual interest in that look. I clenched my fists under the table, but I remained silent. Returning home, I tried to speak. "Claire, what's happening to us?" She took off her shoes and looked at me warily. "Nothing. You've just become too suspicious. I feel you're pulling away. Maybe you're pulling away, Alex. Maybe you're too busy with your business to see me." I wanted to say, "I see you. I feel you're leaving," but I didn't, because at that moment she came to me, hugged me, and her lips were on mine again. And it all happened again. Doubt, passion, silence. Now I understand. It was a game. She kept me on edge, like a puppet on strings. She gave me just enough to keep me from letting go, and she sank deeper and deeper into her own secret. And I, blinded by love and desire, allowed it to continue. At some point, I realized it was impossible to live in conjecture. My thoughts were no longer my own. During the day, I tried to negotiate and monitor the markets, but Claire kept flashing before my eyes, her laughter, her phone, her gaze directed at someone else. At night, I tossed and turned, listening to the silence, catching her every breath beside me. One evening, when she said she was going to see a friend, I couldn't stand it. "Let me drive you," I offered. She frowned. "Why? I can do it myself. I just want to." She paused, then smiled. "Okay." We got in the car. She was wearing a black dress, new jewelry I'd never seen before. She'd been typing on her phone all evening. "Are you happy?" I asked suddenly. She looked at me, surprised. "What kind of weird question is that?" "I just want to know." She smiled and turned to the window. We pulled up to her friend's house. I stopped. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up." And she got out. I remained seated. Something inside me wouldn't let go. I drove on, parked on the next street, and walked back. Sophie's house was clearly visible. Claire entered the building, but about 10 minutes later she came out again, this time with her. There was a man next to her. Tall, in an expensive coat. They stepped outside, and I saw her take his hand. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe my eyes. I followed them. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid they'd hear. They walked down the street, laughing, then he hugged her. She didn't resist. Moreover, she reached out to him and kissed him. I stopped. The whole world collapsed. It was as if the air had vanished. I stood there and watched my wife kiss another man, and I couldn't move. They got into a taxi. I hailed another and ordered the driver to follow them. We drove across the city and stopped at a hotel in the center. I watched them enter the lobby, the receptionist smile at them, take the key and go upstairs. I didn't follow them. There was no point. Everything was already clear. When I got home, I poured myself a whiskey and drank it in one gulp, then another. My hands were shaking. Only one question echoed in my head. Why? There was a photograph of her on the table smiling, happy with our wedding rings on her fingers. I picked up the frame and threw it at the wall. The glass shattered. Claire returned in the morning. I was sitting on the couch, having been awake all night. She came in, took off her coat, and our eyes met. "Where have you been?" I asked quietly. She froze. "At Sophie's." "I told you so." "You're lying," I said. "I saw everything." She turned pale, but then pulled herself together. "Alex, please." "At the hotel. With him? Do you think I'm an idiot?" She came closer, trying to take my hand. "It's not what you think." I jerked my hand away. "Enough." We looked at each other. I waited for her to start making excuses, begging for forgiveness, crying. But she simply sighed and said, "You always work too much." I felt empty. I was searching for what I was missing. These words were worse than a knife. I screamed. I don't remember what exactly I said about betrayal, about vows, about giving her everything. She listened silently. "You destroyed everything," I said at the end. "Our family, our life." She looked at me strangely calmly. Maybe she was already dead. At that moment, I realized this was the end. I couldn't forgive. I couldn't forget. Everything between us died that night when I saw her with another man. I went out onto the balcony, lit a cigar, and looked out over the city. London was bustling as always. People were rushing about, cars were honking. The world went on. Only my world had collapsed. And yet, I didn't yet know that this was only the beginning, because betrayal in the heart is only the first pain. The real blow awaited me later, in court, where Claire testified that the most important thing to her was money. After that morning, I stopped trying to salvage anything. Everything that connected Claire and me was broken. I thought she'd leave on her own, pack her things, and disappear. But I was wrong. She stayed. Moreover, her expression gradually became less guilty and more confident. And then I realized for her this was just the beginning. I hired a lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. I wanted only one thing: to end the marriage and erase her from my life forever. I believed that evidence of infidelity would give me an advantage. I saved the photos I'd taken at the hotel, the taxi driver's statement, even the hotel checkout receipt. "We have a good chance," said my lawyer, Richard, a tall man with a tired expression. "The court will take her infidelity into account." For the first time in a long time, I felt relief. But all that was before the day Claire filed her counterclaim. In her papers, I read something that sent a chill through me. Alexander Morrison systematically neglected our marriage, devoted all his time to work, emotionally suppressed my wife, and created an atmosphere in which I felt alone. Moreover, he controlled all our finances, restricted my freedom, and humiliated me in front of my friends. I read it and couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't true. It was a carefully constructed lie. "She's playing hardball," Richard said. "Get ready, Alex." At the first hearing, I saw a different Claire. She arrived in a formal suit with a serious expression, and her lawyer, a cold woman named Miss Brown, sat next to her. They looked like a team confident of victory. When the judge asked Claire about her demands, she stood up and calmly declared, "I want a division of our assets, including our house, bank accounts, and my husband's investments. I also want half of his business." I couldn't take it anymore. "This is insane," I exclaimed. "This is my business, created long before our marriage." The judge looked at me sternly, Mr. Morrison, please refrain from commenting. Claire sat back down, her face unmoving. Only the corners of her lips lifted slightly. After the hearing, I tried to talk to her. Claire, why all this? Are you trying to destroy me? She looked me straight in the eyes. I just want what's my due. My due? I clenched my fists. You betrayed me, and now you want my money too. You've always loved money more than me, she replied coldly. So it's only fair. The next weeks turned into a nightmare. Claire filed court documents detailing my humiliations. She claimed I yelled at her, forbade her from seeing her friends, and controlled her every move. I read these lines and felt something die inside me, because every argument she made was a lie, but in court it all sounded convincing. Richard tried to calm me down. We'll fight. We have evidence of her infidelity. But deep down, I knew the truth isn't always important. What matters is how it's presented. The second court hearing was even more painful. Claire spoke like an actress. She sat with her head slightly bowed, describing the suffering she'd endured in our marriage. Her voice trembled and tears glistened in her eyes. I felt alone, she said. I screamed for help, but no one heard me. The judge nodded sympathetically. I sat there and thought, she's a genius. She could win an Oscar. When it was my turn, I showed photographs, extracts, and testimonies. I talked about how I'd caught her with another man. But in the eyes of the court, it looked like the response of an embittered husband. That evening, I met her at the exit of the hall. You realize everything you said is a lie, right? I asked. She smiled. And you realize that's not important. I returned home, sat in the empty living room, and poured myself a whiskey. Everything around me seemed alien. This house we'd built together was now battlefield. I lay awake all night, wondering what would happen next, and I realized one thing. She wouldn't stop. She hadn't just cheated on me. She wanted to destroy me completely, take my money, my house, my business, everything I'd built. The next day, Richard said, Alex, we need to prepare for a long war. She's serious, and I'm afraid she has a trump card. What other trump card? She can claim she invested in your business. Even if it's not true, I'll have to prove otherwise. I clutched my head. Damn. Richard sighed. Alex, you have to be prepared to lose a lot. That was the beginning of my true nightmare. I didn't yet know how far she would go, but I already understood. Claire had gone from being my wife to my enemy, and that enemy knew me all too well. When the divorce proceedings began, I still harbored illusions that justice would prevail, but I quickly realized this wasn't about justice. It was about power, money, and cold calculation. And in this battle, Claire was merciless. For the first few weeks, she fought through the courts, but then the real attack began. Journalists started calling me, asking questions about my business and family. One newspaper published an article, Prominent Entrepreneur Accused of Domestic Tyranny. The article recounted her allegations in detail. I sat with the newspaper in my hands and felt the anger burning my cheeks. Claire knew where to strike. My reputation was my capital. It's her, I said to Richard. She screwed everything. He nodded. We'll have to endure. The main thing is to hold my own in court. At the next hearing, she went even further. Claire claimed that some of my investments were made with her money. That's a lie, I exclaimed. She never worked. I handled all the accounts. But her lawyer held up a stack of papers. We have bank transfers confirming her participation. I looked at them and couldn't believe it. These were genuine documents, forged so skillfully that they were impossible to spot at first glance. She couldn't have. I whispered. She could have, Richard said quietly. After the hearing, I tried to talk to Claire. We came face to face in the hallway. Why are you doing this? I asked. She calmly smoothed her hair. I'm just taking what I deserve. You ruined everything. Our life, our home, and now my business. She looked at me coldly. Maybe you never had anything of your own. These words stung. She knew where to strike. Soon, my accounts were seized. The court ordered a temporary asset freeze pending clarification. I found myself in a situation where I couldn't even freely manage my money. I sat in the office, listening to the lawyer read the ruling, and felt the world slipping out from under me. Everything I'd built over the years was at risk. I couldn't sleep at night. I sat in the empty bedroom, inhaling the scent of her perfume that still lingered on the pillows, and wondered how could everything have changed so much. Just a year ago, she'd snuggled close to me and whispered, "I want to be with you forever." Now she was preparing documents to strip me of everything. Sometimes I thought I saw satisfaction in her eyes. One day, as we were leaving court, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Alex, you have no idea how good it feels to watch you crumble." I froze. "Do you hate me?" She smiled. "I'm just tired of being a shadow. Now I want the light myself." The pressure grew stronger with each passing day. My partners began pulling out of deals, fearing scandals. Banks froze loans. I was losing not only money, but also people's trust. And Claire increasingly reminded me of a gambler enjoying the game. She knew how to present herself as a victim in court, in the press, even among our mutual friends. Many began to believe her. One evening, I received a subpoena. She demanded the immediate division of our house. I returned there to our living room, and for the first time realized that I could lose even the walls where we loved and fought. I walked through the rooms. Her things were still in the bedroom, her robe hung in the bathroom. I sat on the bed and covered my face with my hands. How did I end up in this trap? Richard tried to support me. "Alex, we will fight, but be prepared. She'll go all the way." "What do you mean, all the way?" "It means she's short on money. She wants to destroy you as a person." And indeed, she soon filed due papers about dividing not only the business, but also the copyrights, my designs, my contracts. She wanted half of everything, even things she'd never had anything to do with. "This is absurd," I screamed. Richard only sighed heavily. Welcome to reality. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, a glass in my hand. I remembered her laughter, her body, her eyes. I tried to unite the woman I loved with this one who was now ruining my life. But they were different. It was as if Claire had died, and a cold doppelganger had taken her place. And yet, determination grew within me. "She won't win," I said out loud to myself. "I won't let her." But at that moment I didn't know how dirty this war would be. My world was collapsing not gradually, but like an avalanche. It seemed like every new day brought a new loss, a new blow. What had been a solid foundation for my life yesterday was turning into sand, slipping through my fingers. The first to go were my partners. Those who had called me a friend and a reliable business partner just a month ago now spoke coldly and formally. "Alex, we can't risk the company's reputation. The scandal is too big." I nodded, though inside I was seething. They didn't believe I was guilty, but they were afraid for their money. My office gradually emptied. People quit, took documents, carried out boxes. The hallways grew quiet. Once work had been humming here, phones rang, and the laughter of employees echoed through the floor. Now it was like a ghost building. I came home, and it was empty too. Claire no longer lived with me, but her things remained. She didn't take them on purpose. I realized this later. It was her way of reminding me, "I'm still here, I still have a right to your life." I opened her closet one day and saw her dresses neatly hung. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the room. I closed the doors and felt a tightening in my chest. At another court hearing, I realized I was completely losing control. Claire arrived in a white suit, modest and fragile, like innocence itself. She spoke softly, but every word was poison. "Alex always put money above our relationship," she said, and everyone in the courtroom listened attentively. I tried to keep the family together, but he pushed me away. I felt alone, humiliated. The judge nodded, the lawyers took notes, and I sat and clenched my fists under the table to keep from screaming lies. When I tried to object, my words sounded hysterical. She knew how to pause, look the judge in the eye, and her every gesture said, "I'm a victim." After the hearing, I went out into the hallway, sat on a bench, and covered my face with my hands. Richard came over. "Alex, hang in there. We can still fight." "She's destroying everything," I whispered. "I have nothing left." He put his hand on my shoulder. "You have to stand firm. Otherwise, she really will win." But I felt like I was losing. My accounts were frozen. I couldn't pay some contracts, and companies started suing me. A flurry of claims descended on me. The newspapers wrote about me as a man who had lost everything due to cruelty and greed. The articles quoted Claire's words. She looked like a saint, and I looked like a monster. One evening, I ran into an old friend, James. We were sitting at the bar, and he ordered a whiskey. "Alex, I don't know what to believe," he said bluntly. "I've known you for a long time, but her story sounds too convincing." I smiled bitterly. "So she won. Even you doubt it." James looked down. "I'm sorry, friend." I realized that even friends leave. At home, I sat by the fireplace and thought, what happened to me? I once prided myself on building my life from scratch. I had a business, a reputation, a woman I loved. Now I had nothing. And all this because of one person, the one I loved most. Sometimes I thought back to our first years. How we walked in the park, how she laughed, how she held my hand. The memories burned, because now I saw it was an illusion. Or maybe she had simply changed. But these thoughts made it even worse. At some point, I began to lose myself, too. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the man across from me. My cheeks had sunken, my eyes had darkened. I looked 10 years older. One day, Richard said to me, "Alex, you have to hang in there. The court is looking at your condition, too. You can't look broken." I laughed. "But I am broken." And yet, I kept going to court, kept fighting. It was like a no-holds-barred fight, where I stood alone in the ring against an army. Each hearing brought new defeats. The court ordered Claire to receive temporary rights to a portion of my company's shares. Then, to divide the property. Then, to pay her compensation. I sat and listened to the verdicts, and everything inside me was devastated. But the hardest thing was seeing her face. She sat across from me, calm and beautiful, and there wasn't a drop of regret in her eyes. Sometimes I even thought I saw pleasure there. One day, when the meeting was over, she passed by and whispered, "Soon you'll have nothing left." I didn't answer. I simply watched her go, thinking, "You've already taken everything. All that's left is to finish me off." I returned to the empty house, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and stared into the fireplace. And every time I asked the same question, why did I believe so blindly? There was no answer. I was slowly crumbling, and I knew this wasn't the end. I always thought betrayal was the worst thing, but it turns out that true rock bottom is the moment you're left with nothing. No home, no business, no name, no friends. Just you and your emptiness. Court hearings came one after another. Each decision hit me like a hammer. Property division orders, bank seizures, compensation. And then came the day when the judge pronounced what I dreaded most. The house on Highgate Road is transferred to my wife, Claire Morrison. I sat and stared at the table. I heard nothing else. All I could hear was, "Home, our home, hers now." I went there for the last time. The key still fit, but it already felt foreign. I walked through the rooms where life had once been. The bedroom where we shared joys and quarrels. The kitchen where coffee smelled in the mornings. The living room where friends laughed. Now it all belonged to her. I packed a few boxes of things. Suits, books, photographs. I left the rest. It was too hard to touch what was no longer mine. On the way out, I lingered by the door. I ran my hand over the cold wood, and I knew it was over. I rented a small apartment downtown. A one-room apartment with peeling walls and a view of a gray courtyard. When I put the boxes in there, the room seemed even emptier. I opened a bottle of whiskey, sat on the mattress, and stared out the window for a long time. That's it, Alex. This is where your love has led you. The world didn't wait. The companies I still owned were abandoning contracts one after another. Banks were demanding repayment of debts. I no longer controlled the business. Most of the shares were already owned by Claire. I tried to fight, but I lost every time. One day, I met her by chance in a restaurant. She was sitting at a table with the very man for whom she had once betrayed me. They were laughing, holding hands. She noticed me and smiled faintly as if to remind me I won. I went outside, got into the car, and sat there for a long time, unable to start the engine. My days became a gray sequence. Court, office, apartment. Sometimes I went without food for days. Sometimes I got drunk and fell asleep with my clothes on. I was no longer myself. And yet, a strange feeling simmered inside. Not anger, not revenge. Emptiness. As if I had died, but my body lived on. I thought she took everything. But maybe that's precisely her curse, because one day she, too, will have to pay. By the end of the year, I had nothing left. The business was completely under the control of others. The house was hers. The money was divided. My reputation was ruined. One day, I looked in the mirror and realized, sitting before me was a man I didn't know. Pale, haggard, with empty eyes. "Who are you?" I asked my reflection. It was silent. I went outside and walked through the city at night. London lived its own life. Cars, lights, people. And I walked, and I didn't care. I thought about Claire, about how I once loved her more than life itself, and now she had destroyed me. And yet, somewhere deep down, I felt the story isn't over yet. Because karma exists, and its time will come. But for me, it was a collapse, complete, final. I thought my life was over, but it turned out that falling isn't the end. The end comes when you decide never to get up again. Despite the emptiness inside me, I felt a strange stubbornness. If I'd already lost everything, then I had nothing to fear. The turning point came unexpectedly. I was sitting in my gray apartment, an empty bottle on the table, and a folder of documents on my lap. They were papers from an old project. I opened them by accident, but suddenly noticed details I'd missed. A company merger plan. Strange signatures that didn't match. The more I read, the clearer it became. Claire and her new lover had pulled off a scam even before the divorce. They'd exploited my trust, forged documents, and transferred money to shell accounts. I sat there staring at the lines of text, and something inside me clicked. She took everything from me, but if I prove this, she'll have nothing left. I called Richard. "I have something. Come over." He arrived an hour later, and I laid the papers out in front of him. "See, these signatures. They're not my handwriting, and the dates don't match. The money was gone here before I even knew about the deal." Richard was silent for a long moment, then said, "Alex, if this is true, she'll be in serious trouble." "It's true," I replied coldly, "and now I'm going to prove it." We started gathering materials. We spent weeks poring over contracts, statements, and agreements. The deeper we dug, the more dirt emerged. Claire and her lover had been plotting this for a long time. The divorce was just the final step to legitimize the theft. I felt a surge of strength awaken within me. It was like a fire. I was no longer the broken man who had cried by the fireplace. Now I wanted only one thing: justice. A month later, we had a folder of evidence. I held it in my hands, my heart pounding. "Richard," I said, "it's time." We went to the prosecutor's office. The investigation began. At first, I didn't believe they'd take the case seriously. But when the experts confirmed the forgery of the signatures, a glimmer of hope flared inside me. And then everything started spinning. Subpoenas for questioning, document requests, office searches. Claire's name appeared in the newspapers again, but now the words fraud and swindle were next to it. I saw her again in court. This time her gaze had changed. There was no confidence in it. She nervously adjusted her hair, answered briefly, tried to smile, but it trembled. I sat across from her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not pain, but cold satisfaction. "Now it's your turn to lose." But despite this, there was another feeling inside, a strange sadness. I still remembered the woman I'd once fallen in love with. I wanted to ask, "Why did you do all this? Couldn't you just leave?" But I remained silent. Words no longer mattered. The scandal was growing. Her new lover had disappeared. They said he'd gone abroad. She was left alone against the system. Those who had previously applauded her victory were now turning their backs on her. The newspapers that had called her a victim were now writing, "The predator caught in a trap." One evening, I went outside and breathed in the cool air. London was still going on as usual, lights, people, cars. But for me, the city had become different. I felt like I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. Retribution didn't bring me happiness. It didn't bring back my home, my business, my friends. But it did bring back what was most important: my self-respect. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in months, I saw not empty eyes, but fire. "You're alive again, Alex," I said to my reflection, and for the first time, it smiled back. I never thought I'd sit in a courtroom again and feel like a winner. Not that I'd won, no, there was no real victory here. Too much had been lost. But I was no longer a victim. Claire entered the courtroom after me. I noticed how her face had changed. Tired, her skin dull, dark circles under her eyes. She was still beautiful, but there was something broken in it now. She didn't look me in the eye, she avoided my gaze. The judge read out the list of charges: fraud, forgery, misappropriation. Every word hit her the same way her words once hit me. I sat calmly. No anger, no joy. I simply watched. The lawyers tried to defend her, but there was too much evidence. Documents, signatures, money transfers to offshore accounts. The scheme was obvious. One of the experts said bluntly, "It's a crude forgery." This wasn't even professional level. There was a certainty here that no one would ever check. And in that moment, I realized Claire had lost precisely because of her pride. She was sure that punishment wouldn't touch her, but it did. During the break, I went out into the hallway. She came up to me. "Alex." Her voice trembled. "Please, let's talk." I looked at her and felt only fatigue. "About what?" I asked. "You know, I didn't want things to go this far. I'm confused." I chuckled. "Confused? You stole everything from me. You ruined my life. And now that the truth is out, you say you're confused." She looked down. "I didn't want you to suffer, but you enjoyed it," I said quietly. "I saw your smile when you took my house away." She didn't answer. And in that moment, I realized I don't love her anymore. I don't even hate her. I just feel nothing. The trial lasted for several months. Finally, the sentencing day arrived. Claire was found guilty of fraud and sentenced to several years probation and compensation. Her career, her reputation, everything was destroyed. When the judge spoke his final words, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, not from joy, from relief. After the hearing, I went outside. Autumn. London was grey, but for me, the day was bright. I knew I survived. Richard came up to me, smiled, and said, "You did it, Alex." I shook his hand. "No, Richard, she did it herself. I simply helped show her the truth. Life didn't go back to normal. I lost my home forever. I had to build a business from scratch. My friends never returned. But new people came along who knew me no longer as a successful entrepreneur, but as someone who had survived hell and not broken. I rented an office and started a new project. Small, but honest. I worked every day, and it was like breathing. Simple, yet necessary. I occasionally heard about Claire. The newspapers wrote that she tried to get a job at new companies, but the doors were closed everywhere. People whispered behind her back. Her name became a symbol of betrayal and greed. One day, I saw her on the street. She walked quickly, her head down, as if afraid of being recognized. And in that moment, I realized karma had caught up with her. I no longer felt pain or anger, only silence. That evening, I sat by the window in my new apartment, drinking tea and looking out over the city. A feeling of peace filled my chest. I had lived through betrayal, hardship, humiliation, but I remained myself. I remembered something my father had once said: "The most important thing is not what you have, but who you remain when you lose everything." And I smiled, because now I knew I had persevered. This was my ending, but not the end. This was the beginning of a new life. I often think about what trust means. It seems simple and natural. We trust our loved ones, friends, partners. We believe their words, their actions. But the worst thing about trust is that it can't be restored once it's broken. Several years have passed since everything happened. I live in a different apartment, in a different neighborhood. I have a small but stable business. I work less for the money and more for the process. I've learned to value peace of mind, not the numbers in my account. Some evenings I go to a small bar on the street corner, have a glass of red wine, and watch people laugh at the neighboring tables. And I think how little they understand how fragile their lives are. One betrayal, and everything falls apart. But I'm not jealous. I just know what they don't yet know. Claire disappeared from my life as suddenly as she once burst into it with her betrayal. Sometimes her name flickers in the news quietly, somewhere in the background. Lawsuits, debts, attempts to rebuild a career. I never once tried to meet her. Why? I know that for her, this punishment is worse than any sentence. Living knowing her true nature has been revealed. Now she's seen for who she really is without her mask. One day, I met a woman on the street who vaguely reminded me of Claire. The same blonde hair, the same light gait. For a second, my heart fluttered as if time had rewinded. But then I laughed. I was no longer the kind of person who blindly chases illusions. Many people asked, "Alex, you must hate her, right? Do you want revenge?" I answered no. True revenge is moving on. And it's true. At some point, I realized that if I continued to burn with hatred, I would once again give it power over me, and I would no no longer allow anyone to control my life. I've become more attentive to people. I don't immediately believe words anymore. I look at actions, at the little things. Sometimes this makes me cold, cautious, but perhaps this is how I'm meant to live now. And yet, the desire to believe remains within me. Though cautiously, though slowly, I'm learning to trust again. Because without trust, life becomes a desert. Recently, a woman came into my life. Her name is Hannah. She's not like Claire. She lacks that bright, almost predatory beauty. She's warm, calm, with a quiet smile. When she's around, I don't feel the fire of passion, but something else, a home I no longer have. I don't know yet what will come of this. Maybe nothing, but I try not to run from this feeling. Sometimes in the evenings, I write notes. It's more like a diary. I write for myself, but maybe someday it will become a book. A book about how easy it is to lose everything if you misplace your trust. I want others to hear my story and think, who are they handing over the keys to their lives to? Looking back, I have no regrets. Yes, I lost a lot. Money, my home, my reputation, my friends. But I gained the most important thing. Clarity. I learned who I really am when I have nothing left, and I realized strength doesn't come from never falling. Strength comes from rising up even when the whole world is against you. Now I walk through life more carefully, but with every step I feel solid ground beneath my feet, and that's worth all the losses. The price of trust was too high, but I paid it, and now I am free.